that kind of thing. I would like to be remembered as a good actor.
Yes, I am! I think you're having a nervous breakdown.
You get to shoot people.
A lot more than we realized it.
I'll see you again. I'm just going to start shooting and...
Investigators reveal causes of death for Gene Hackman and his wife. What really happened? Inside their secluded home in Santa Fe. How could such a tragedy unfold? For a man who spent decades commanding the screen with unparalleled presence, the revelation of Gene Hackman's cause of death struck like a cold wind, sudden, unexplainable, and devastating. The world watched in shock as investigators disclosed the heartbreaking details behind the deaths of Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, revealing a story more tragic than anyone could have imagined. On February 26, 2025, the bodies of Gene Hackman, 95, and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, 65, were discovered inside their secluded home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Investigators quickly ruled out foul play and any Hollywood scandal. No, the truth was far more chilling. Betsy had succumbed to a rare virus, while Gene, debilitated by advanced Alzheimer's and severe heart disease, had lived with her body for nearly a week, unaware and utterly alone. How could this have happened? For a man whose characters fought fate with every breath, it seems almost cruel that his final battle was fought in silence and solitude.
Was he aware that Miss Hackman had died? And I think that question's difficult to answer, but I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
As investigators pieced together the events leading to their deaths, a haunting picture emerged. One of isolation, of a quiet life interrupted by a tragic twist of fate. This is the story of their final days, a tale of love, loss, and the eerie silence that settled over a house in Santa Fe. The causes of death, an unseen enemy and a fading hero. The revelation of how Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa met their tragic ends sent shockwaves not only through Hollywood but across the world. It was a story no one saw coming. Two lives intertwined in love, brought to a devastating end by forces both cruel and unseen. Betsy, a gifted classical pianist known for her grace and quiet dignity, had fallen victim to hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare but deadly respiratory disease contracted through exposure to rodent droppings, urine, or saliva. For a virus so uncommon, the mere suggestion of its presence was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, HPS, first identified in the United States in 1993, is caused by a strain of hantavirus carried primarily by deer mice. The disease often begins with flu-like symptoms, fever, muscle aches, and fatigue, before rapidly progressing to severe respiratory distress. The mortality rate for HPS ranges from 38% to 50%, making it one of the most lethal viruses to contract. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the virus does not spread from person to person, which only deepened the mystery. How could this have happened in a home as secure and secluded as theirs? Investigators believe Betsy might have unknowingly inhaled the aerosolized virus particles while going about her day-to-day life. Their property, surrounded by the wilderness of Santa Fe, New Mexico, was a haven for wildlife. Evidence of rodent activity was found in outbuildings on the estate, though none inside the main house. The tragedy lay not only in her untimely death, but in the heartbreaking thought that it could have been prevented. Did she ever suspect that something was wrong? Was there a moment of realization, or did the virus steal that from her too? For Gene Hackman, the cause of death was determined to be hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, with advanced Alzheimer's disease as a significant contributory factor. The autopsy report was a somber testament to years of silent suffering, a heart weakened by chronic high blood pressure, multiple prior heart attacks, and a brain profoundly scarred by Alzheimer's. Hackman's condition had been kept from the public eye, a secret shielded by a man who had always guarded his privacy fiercely. Alzheimer's disease, a cruel thief of memory and dignity, is characterized by progressive degeneration of neurons, leading to memory loss, confusion, and an eventual loss of bodily functions. For Hackman, it was a slow and inexorable decline, a battle fought quietly behind the closed doors of their home. Did he ever suspect that the end was near? Or did the fog of Alzheimer's mercifully protect him from the truth of his own fading? An irony almost too bitter to bear for a man who once played characters that defied fate with every breath. The autopsy revealed that Hackman's heart had stopped beating on February 18, 2025, a week after Betsy's death. The pacemaker data showed an abnormal heart rhythm, atrial fibrillation, the last recorded sign of life. His stomach was empty, suggesting he had not eaten in days, but he was not dehydrated, indicating he had found water. It paints a picture of confusion and isolation. An aging actor, once larger than life, reduced to a shadow, wandering his home alone and unaware of the tragedy that had already claimed his wife. In the end, the revelation of their causes of death left us with more questions than answers. How could a virus so rare strike a woman so suddenly? How long did Hackman live in that house, alone with his memories and a grief he might not have even understood? The silence that surrounded their deaths was as profound as it was tragic. An unseen enemy and a fading hero, gone before anyone knew to save them. A timeline of tragedy, the final days of Betsy Arakawa. The unraveling of Betsy Arakawa's final days reads like a tragedy too cruel to be real. A series of small, ordinary actions that, in hindsight, seem to march inevitably toward a heartbreaking end. How could a life so carefully built, so quietly lived, unravel so swiftly and without warning? Investigators, determined to uncover the truth, meticulously pieced together a timeline of Betsy's last movements, hoping to make sense of a tragedy that defied understanding. It began on February 9th, 2025, when Betsy took Zinnia, her beloved Australian Kelpie, to the Gruda Veterinary Hospital for a routine procedure. By all accounts, it was an ordinary day. No one could have imagined that within 48 hours, her life would take a fatal turn. As investigators later discovered, this day was significant not for what happened, but for what didn't. No signs of illness, no warnings, just the simple rhythms of a quiet life. But by February 11th, everything had changed. Surveillance footage revealed Betsy running errands in Santa Fe with the unhurried grace of someone who believed tomorrow was a certainty. Cameras captured her at a Sprouts Farmers Market, selecting groceries with care. At CVS Pharmacy, she picked up her thyroid medication that, in a cruel twist of fate, would be found later, scattered on the bathroom floor beside her lifeless body. Her final stop was a pet food store, where she purchased supplies for the 3 dogs that she and Gene Hackman adored like family. The footage showed no signs of distress. Betsy moved with ease, her demeanor calm, her posture upright. No cough, no fever, no outward hint of the invisible enemy already at work inside her. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is insidious that way, often starting with mild symptoms easily mistaken for a common cold: fatigue, slight fever, muscle aches. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the virus can incubate for 1 to 8 weeks after exposure, spreading silently through the lungs until it reaches a deadly tipping point. By the time the coughing and shortness of breath begin, it's often too late. At 5:15 p.m., Betsy's car passed through the gate to their secluded home, recorded by a security camera. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Investigators found her computer filled with unread emails, time-stamped after that day, a silent testimony to a life abruptly cut short. Inside the house, the scene was both tragic and disturbingly simple. Betsy's body was discovered in the bathroom, collapsed beside a prescription bottle of thyroid medication, its cap removed and pills scattered across the tiles. The medical examiner later confirmed that the pills were not responsible for her death. She had taken them as prescribed. So, what happened in those final moments? Was she trying to take her medication when the virus struck with lethal suddenness? Or did the disease's rapid progression overwhelm her before she could even call for help? The heartbreaking truth is that hantavirus can escalate with terrifying speed. Once the virus infiltrates the lungs, it causes pulmonary edema. The lungs fill with fluid, and breathing becomes a desperate, losing battle. Without immediate intensive care, survival is a distant hope. Investigators believe Betsy's exposure may have occurred weeks earlier, possibly through contact with rodent droppings near their property, a hidden threat lurking in the shadows of their quiet life. As investigators gathered clues, one fact became painfully clear. Betsy's death was not just tragic, but profoundly lonely. The man who should have been by her side, Gene Hackman, her husband of over 30 years, was in another room, lost in the fog of advanced Alzheimer's disease, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding just steps away. Can you imagine it? A woman alone in her final moments, her only company the walls of a bathroom that had witnessed her most vulnerable hours. The simplicity of the scene was its most heartbreaking aspect. A prescription bottle, a tiled floor, and a silence so profound it seemed to echo through the entire house. In the end, the tragedy of Betsy Arakawa's death is not just in how she died, but in how suddenly and silently life slipped away, leaving a grieving world to wonder what her final thoughts might have been, and whether, in those last moments, she understood that she would not be alone for long. The silence of a legend, Gene Hackman's final week. In the twilight of his life, Gene Hackman's final week was a heart-wrenching contrast to the commanding presence that had defined him on screen. Known for his fierce intelligence and indomitable spirit in roles such as Popeye Doyle in The French Connection and Little Bill Daggett in Unforgiven, the legendary actor's last days were marked not by the defiance of fate, but by a cruel isolation brought on by advanced Alzheimer's disease. Confined to his secluded home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Hackman likely wandered its quiet hallways in confusion, each room a labyrinth of memories slipping further from his grasp. Can you imagine a more heartbreaking end for a man who once held audiences spellbound with just a look? The data from Hackman's pacemaker revealed a chilling truth. His heart continued to beat until February 18th, when it recorded an abnormal rhythm known as atrial fibrillation, the final sign of life. Found slumped in the mudroom off the kitchen, his cane lying beside him, it was a scene stark in its simplicity, a haunting reminder of how alone he truly was. Medical experts suggest that atrial fibrillation, often triggered by extreme stress or underlying cardiovascular conditions, can cause blood clots and stroke, making it a silent killer. For Hackman, whose atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease had already ravaged his heart, it was likely the final blow in a battle he could not win. In a tragic twist, Hackman's stomach was empty, yet he showed no signs of dehydration, a perplexing detail that suggests he may have been drinking water but was too disoriented to find food. Alzheimer's, particularly in its advanced stages, can distort perceptions of hunger and thirst, leaving victims lost even in familiar surroundings. Did he call out for help, his voice swallowed by the silence of those empty rooms? Or did the fog of Alzheimer's shroud his reality so completely that he never knew his wife was gone? That he was alone in a house that had suddenly grown too large, too quiet, too empty? The tragedy is compounded by the knowledge that Betsy Arakawa, his wife of over 30 years, had died days earlier from hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare and often fatal respiratory disease. Her body was found in the bathroom, collapsed beside a prescription bottle, her final moments a solitary struggle. For Hackman, whose mind was clouded by Alzheimer's, it is all too likely that he never understood what had happened, that the woman who had been his anchor was gone forever. Is there any sorrow greater than that of a mind that cannot grasp its own loss? As the investigation closes, the world is left to grapple with the profound sadness of Gene Hackman's final days. A life that once shone so brightly, now dimmed to darkness in the silence of a house on a hill. For those who admired him, the tragedy lies not just in the manner of his death, but in the way his final battle was fought, in silence, in solitude, and without the dignity that his life's work so richly deserved. A house of mystery. The investigation continues. When authorities entered Gene Hackman's secluded Santa Fe home, they were confronted by an unsettling scene that raised more questions than answers. The front door was left ajar, an eerie invitation into a world frozen in time. Inside, the silence was suffocating. In a small room off the hallway, one of the couple's 3 beloved dogs, Zinnia, an Australian Kelpie, was found dead in a crate, likely from starvation. The other 2 dogs, Nikita and Bear, were discovered alive, wandering freely through the house. The sight was both heartbreaking and perplexing. Why was Zinnia locked away while the others roamed free? Sheriff Adan Mendoza confirmed that there were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, and no suggestion of foul play. It was a tragedy born of isolation, not violence. A slow and silent collapse within the walls of what seemed like a peaceful home. As investigators scoured the property, they discovered traces of rodent activity in outbuildings surrounding the house, pointing to a possible source of the hantavirus that had claimed Betsy Arakawa's life. The virus, transmitted through rodent droppings and urine, can progress rapidly, causing severe respiratory failure. Did Betsy ever suspect that something so small could bring such devastation? Did she notice the warning signs, the faint rustling in the walls, the occasional droppings, or did the threat remain hidden until it was too late? For Gene Hackman, whose mind was clouded by advanced Alzheimer's, the truth may have been mercifully out of reach. In the end, the house that had been their sanctuary became a silent witness to their final days, a place of unanswered questions and a sorrow that lingers long after the doors have closed. The life they shared, a love story in silence. For over 30 years, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa lived a life far removed from Hollywood's spotlight, a life defined by quiet devotion and shared passions. Their home in Santa Fe was a serene refuge, filled with books, paintings, and the soft melodies of Betsy's piano playing. Hackman, having retired from acting in 2004, spent his days painting and writing historical novels by hand, finding solace in creativity away from the cameras. Betsy, a classically trained pianist, brought warmth and music to their home, turning ordinary moments into treasured memories. Their love was built on simple joys, sunset walks, dinners at home, and evenings spent laughing over a game of cards. It was a life without spectacle, but rich with meaning. A love story told in stolen glances and quiet conversations, not red carpets or magazine covers. That they died within days of each other seems a heartbreaking twist of fate, yet it also feels like a testament to a bond that even death could not easily sever. In the end, their story reminds us that true love often speaks in whispers, not shouts. A final farewell. The legacy of Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman's career was a masterclass in authenticity. From the rogue cop in The French Connection to the ruthless sheriff in Unforgiven, his characters were flawed, complex, and undeniably human. Even his villains, like Lex Luthor in Superman, were layered with a charisma that made them unforgettable. In his final years, Hackman turned his creative energy to writing and painting, producing historical novels and donating his artwork to charity. His legacy is not just a collection of roles, but a lesson in dignity, a life lived on his own terms. Can we really measure a man by the roles he played? Or is his true legacy found in the quiet, unguarded moments, the love he shared, the passions he pursued, and the courage it took to walk away from Hollywood at the height of his fame? Conclusion: the curtain falls. As the investigation draws to a close, we are left with more questions than answers. But perhaps the greatest tragedy is not the manner of their deaths, but the silence that surrounded them. In the end, Gene Hackman's life was a reminder that even the mightiest must bow to time. His films will endure, a legacy of grit and grace that no virus or illness can erase. But for those who loved him, the real loss is not just the actor, but the man who chose love and quiet over fame. Goodbye, Gene Hackman. Your story may have ended, but your legacy will live on. What do you think? Was their fate a cruel twist of destiny, or a poignant end to a love story decades in the making? Your thoughts, like their legacy, deserve to be heard.